Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hey there, and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I'm Ben West, and we are here today at Storycatcher Studio, which is where we record our podcast. And I'm really excited that you have joined us, Brad. So Brad is the founder, owner of Storycatcher Studio and runs the cameras, does some editing. This is his thing. So thanks for having us. And, let me just say first, starting off, I really appreciate being here and just having access to great equipment, you and Alicia being great at supporting what we're trying to do. It definitely made a huge difference, just kind of quality wise, ease of getting the podcast out, all of that. So I appreciate you. Just the service that you provide. So welcome to Magic in the Room.
Thanks.
So today I want to just kind of explore purpose, how we come to be purpose driven. And so Brad, I see you as a very purpose driven person, just in the things that you do in your life. And so I think just as an opening question, we're just going to dive right in. What's your story? How did you come to be a purpose driven person that's doing some purpose driven things?
Yeah. So I spent a lot of my life as kind of a shotgun purpose person, trying to add value wherever I could and spreading myself incredibly thin. And I think my story from kid to now, a lot of my life was spent in a pressure cooker, right? And I think when you spend a lot of your life in a pressure cooker, you start to become more and more focused, and the outcomes that you get, you realize are solely related to the inputs you put in, right? Like that personal responsibility issue was huge for my dad teaching me. And then all through life, that realization of you will be able to measure what you're going to get out based on what you put in. It's, I think there's a popular meme right now or something. This shows how old I am. But it's like, you can't complain about the results you didn't get from the work you didn't do. And that's just been pounded into my head for a long, long time. And so to get back to what you were initially asking, that how did I get to purpose? How did I get to meaning? I think one of the most influential things was the first time I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And that reality of, he makes a kind of statement in there of, so often men have the audacity to look up to the heavens and demand from the celestial beings of, why am I here? And the reality might be that the God of everything is looking down and saying, why are you there? Like, be meaningful. It's not about having this cosmic intrinsic meaning of this one thing you need to do, but how can you be meaningful in your day-to-day life? And so one of the things I love about you guys is your focus on purpose and meaning and performance and how they all relate. And so my purpose statement, the boxed version, right, is to empower people to lead, live, and love in the story they're made for. And it's an ongoing thing. And so you always have to evolve how you participate in somebody's story based on where they're at in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So how did you come to that statement? What was kind of your process that got you there? And what were the experiences? So Viktor Frankl was part of it. What kind of led to that?
So a big part of my story is this stuff, right? But thinking I wanted to make movies. So traveling around and being on sets of different things and documentaries and small short films and all that sort of thing. And I thought I was in love with making movies, and over time, very slow drip, it was the water on the rock that eventually became the river of what I'm really passionate about is story. And I'm a huge believer in, if you study the mythos of creation from any viewpoint, any story that's been told, from the Aztecs and the Mesopotamians to the Bible to wherever. There's this idea that story brings order to chaos, because story is how we communicate knowledge. It's how we pass on tradition and language. It's how we pass on belief and value. So I would love to say there was like this pivotal moment where it all clicked and made sense, that I cared about people's stories as individuals. But the really unattractive reality is that it was a very slow transition from thinking I had this one amazing purpose to the reality that this world is chaotic. Everything about it is chaotic. And that storytelling and story catching, which is, we can get into that whenever, but there's this need in everybody's independent life, and then as us as a tribe of humans, that story is needed to bring a little bit of order to the chaos that exists. Yeah, there's something interesting here about how you said that your purpose kind of emerged. There wasn't like a single time where you like, oh, this is my purpose. And I think like as we talk to people about purpose, we hear that a lot, where people sort of think that there needs to be like one big event and all of a sudden, like I know my purpose. And that's just not reality. When it emerges and you have to discover it. Well, and how horrible would it be if that was the case and you got there? Right? Like, purpose achieved.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, there's something about the discovery. I was just thinking like, it's interesting because I at one time thought that like my purpose was to be a graphic designer basically. And at some point I realized, no, it's not about graphic design. It's about like problem solving. Like that was really what I was interested in. And I kind of heard some reflections of this. You had sort of like this distraction of like movie making, but really it was about story. So I don't know, Luke, did you have something like that distracted you from, not distracted, that's not the right word, but kind of was a stand-in for what was real?
I don't know if it was a thing, like I'm focused on one trade and, now I discover it's a different one. But what resonated as you were sharing, Brad, was this idea of thinking that I knew what purpose was and then realizing that it was something different. I remember for me, it was like trying to find the right answer.
Yeah.
Like I thought there was a right answer for my purpose out there that had been created and placed there and carved in some tablet somewhere. And if I just learned enough and if I just tried hard enough and if I was just good enough, I would really be able to discover that purpose and then fulfill that purpose. And for me, the aha, it wasn't an aha because it was a long, drawn out, sometimes painful, sometimes really full of joy process of realizing that like I kind of get to make it up.
Yeah.
And that my purpose I get to create and shape. And are there parts of it that I discover as I excavate, what's inside me, what I truly care about and how I can provide good to the world? Like, sure. Yeah. There's some pieces inside me that are seeded with some unique things that are just Luke Freeman. But I kind of get to choose how much I want to lean into each of those pieces. Just like you guys. I mean, if I was going to pick something, I might try and be like some sort of outdoor writer or something, like go do adventure stuff and see if I could hack it as a photographer, author, whatever. But I've chosen not to do that, right? I've chosen to do it in kind of leadership development world instead. And so it was very helpful to me to start viewing that as a choice and like me creating purpose rather than, finding the right answer magically all of a sudden one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah. I know you've, coached and consulted a lot of people too, this kind of idea of purpose. I know you have kind of a model. I don't know exactly what words you put on it, but like, what's your experience been seeing other people kind of get hung up with like, I need an aha, or there's like a purpose written for me out there and I just have to discover it. Like, I don't know. I'm just curious, like broaden our horizons a little bit beyond the people that we talk to. Like what are other people experiencing that when they try to discover that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we live in such a goal-driven world, and I don't know if that's an American thing or a world thing. I'm not intelligent enough to know that. I think we live in such a reverse engineered goal-oriented world that people get so stuck on what's my 10-year vision, what's my 5-year dream, whatever it is, right? And so the way I've always coached people through that is less of where do you want to get and more of who do you want to become, right? Like who you become is completely separate from what you accomplish. And it will lead to accomplishment and it will lead to great and beautiful things. But kind of like Luke was saying, you get to write the things, but who you become is a total character thing. It's a total heart level integrity. What type of human being do I want to be remembered or realized as? So that's really where on the coaching side of things, I would walk with anybody is, what do you want to do? Great. All right, now let's set that aside. And who do you really want to become? And as you start to discover identity, people start to realize most of the time in my experience, they didn't really want the things they thought they wanted. The world told them they wanted those things.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful for me because I say this a lot where this idea of purpose can't be kind of couched in guilt. And because we hear that from people, and I don't know, maybe I may overemphasize this just because of some experiences that I had with people that I coach where they were kind of coming and they were like, I feel guilty because I haven't had a purpose or these kinds of things. And just like really try to push back on that idea that there should be any guilt in this at all. And so, yeah, that idea of that this is more about who you want to become is interesting, but the big connection is just how goal oriented we are and how just sort of like linear we are. And that if it's just like another thing on the check the box list, then it's just going to be about guilt. So I really appreciate that approach of, yeah, we can't just make it a goal that we have to do, but it has to be about something about who we become.
Can I tell a really quick story on that?
Absolutely.
My wife's grandfather, Jarl Johnson, he was a president of an oil and gas company, very successful, and I was so lucky to get several years where Jeanette and I were together, where I got to sit with him and ask questions and he would tell me stories. And that was really something that he poured into me when I would ask him about what does success look like? How do you become successful? And because at that point, when I first met him, I had this very similar ideas, right? Of, well, success equals money or success equals position and authority or whatever it is. And he really poured that into me of when you find mentors, stop asking them questions about how they got there and start looking at who they are and why you want to become more like them. And so that has just stayed with me and in the purpose arena.
Yeah. Interesting. So yeah, looking at who they are, not just what they do. Yeah.
Yeah. So you shared a little bit about intentionality. That's a theme I heard as you were kind of giving your prologue here. Even the meme, you can't complain about results you didn't get from the work you didn't do. I think when I hear that and then I hear you say like, well, goal orientation is a little bit overrated. How do you kind of pull apart this idea of intentionality and goal orientation?
To me, intentionality is about what I put in, right? And yeah, there's going to be outcomes, and it would be foolish to say we shouldn't be setting goals and measuring those goals and creating metrics that lead to outcomes so we can adjust and everything. I mean, I run a small business. It would be a really gigantic failure if I had 0 goals.
Yeah.
But those goals aren't my primary focus, right? me intentionally living out who I'm supposed to be and whatever arena that is, and being purposeful and intentional doesn't change. And it's not, the success of my purpose isn't measured by the outcomes. It's measured by the inputs, right? So if I show up every day and some of the stuff you guys talk about of transformational, transactional, and all these different types of environments, if I don't show up every day and pour into the people I'm responsible for leading, the people that I'm around every day, you know, whether it's my business partner or whether it's just people I'm going to interact with, client meetings, whatever, that's where my intentionality is focused. Is, again, how can I make their story better by engaging and interacting with them today? And if I can make their story better, win.
Yeah. You know, that makes me think, I know you guys both know Chris King, and we interviewed him on the podcast about, you know, leading traumatized workforces. But he has, you know, something that's been very helpful to me. And man, it's probably been 15 years since I heard him talk about this the first time, about this idea of being a consumer versus being a contributor. And this idea of consumer versus contributor is as a litmus test for where our focus is and where our intentionality is. I hear some echoes of that in what you're saying. So like intentionality is a little bit value neutral, right? But am I being intentional in how do I want to contribute to the people around me, the world around me, the systems that I'm a part of, whatever it is? Or I can also be intentional in here's what I want to consume. And what do I have to do to get that thing that I want to consume? What do I have to do to get that vacation? What do I have to do to get that house or that car or whatever it is, right? Versus what do I have to do to be someone that people tell stories about 20 years after I'm dead? You know, very different focuses of intent. This is maybe a tangent, but, you know, I'm thinking about it a little bit because I read this the other day and I thought it was super interesting. And I think it goes to, well, I don't want to ruin it. Let me first ask you the question. When do you guys think you started kind of commonly using the phrase, oh, that's on my bucket list? Or that people started talking about that? Like, has it been around for, 50 years? Like, what's your gut?
I'm going to say 30 years.
Yeah, I feel like it's probably been around since the 50s or 60s, but my first interaction with it, I think, was in a movie called Grumpy Old Men.
Yeah.
That was like my first realization of, oh, what is a bucket list?
Yeah. So, you guys heard of the Mandela effect? So the Mandela effect is the idea that popular consciousness can believe things that aren't true. And so it gets its name from, like, a lot of people believe and remember, they think they remember that Nelson Mandela died in prison in South Africa in the 80s. Well, that's not true. He lived, I think, till like the teens. He was freed. He's a political figure in South Africa way after he was in prison. Well, what I read the other day that kind of blew my mind, because I would have said the same thing you guys are saying, is that the bucket list was not even a commonly used term. It wasn't in popular consciousness until the 2007 movie, The Bucket List.
Oh, wow.
Which I think had a grumpy old man flavor to it.
Maybe
grumpy
that,
old man.
yeah.
But 2007 is the first time kind of in pop culture that people started saying, oh, that's on my bucket list.
Wow.
So we have these false memories but I think my whole point to that story is that this forward-looking goal orientation is so prevalent in our culture that as soon as a word came along, a phrase came along to encapsulate this, that's what I want when I'm old. That's what I want to do before I die. That's what I want. That's what I want. Like, it just, like, everyone internalized it. Everyone started, I remember, like, once I started really thinking about it, I remember this might have been like in youth group or something. I don't know. Maybe not, because I would have, if it's 2007, I was like an adult.
Yeah.
But people, like, as they get to know you, would be like, hey, what are the top 5 things on your bucket list, And just the speed at which our culture adopted that phrase, I think speaks to, like, it's very deep in who we are.
Yeah.
And we have a similar popular consciousness around character and around contribution? Like, I don't know. It's hard for me to come up with an analogous example.
Yeah, well, and you go back kind of historically into the way our brains are wired, and it's like survival, right?
Yeah.
If we own farms next to each other and you grow cattle and I grow corn, I want you to survive simply because it helps me survive. And so there's no real, what's it called? Unmerited or undeserved kindness there.
Yeah.
It all goes back to the thriving of my family or my home too. That's a really interesting thought, is there might not be any mental ubiquitous character.
Yeah, I think about like the story of, George Washington cutting down the cherry tree. There are these archetypal, altruistic examples. But if I'm going to circle back to what you're sharing about intentionality, I wonder if we live in a world where we don't have to be kind to our neighbor. There's not really huge consequences to not being, at least immediate, concrete consequences. So we have to apply our intentionality differently and maybe more intentionally. I probably shouldn't define a word by using it.
It works.
Yeah. We might have to be more intentional with our contribution to those around us and how we want to show up and contribute.
Well, that's really interesting too, because we're all kind of members of 100 tribes, right? Like I have my family at home. I have peers. I have my team at the office. I have all these different things that I'm a member of. And it would be incredibly easy for your character to shift with every group of people you're with, to be accepted by the people you're with.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it seems like that's part of the value of purpose, is it gives you something to kind of anchor how you show up in each of those contexts back to. And I'm curious, and this kind of goes along with what you're saying, we've had a few people who have kind of pushed back against this idea of purpose or whatever. And lots of times it's kind of around, I want to live for me, and you're asking me to do something that is like not about me. And so, cause I don't know, rightly or wrongly, we kind of push purpose as something that's about like your positive impact in the world. But some people, they just want to accumulate money and power, whatever, like that's their purpose. So yeah, so we don't have this kind of shared understanding where all of us are saying, whatever your purpose is, however you live it out, it should be positive. Oftentimes the people that we lift up as good examples are not that, So I don't know. I'm kind of curious, how do you, either of you, but if people are exploring their purpose and they're coming to kind of selfish things, is that wrong? Is that not purpose? How do you think about that? I know that's a big question, but I'm curious how you respond.
Yeah, I think a purpose in general can be selfish or altruistic or somewhere in between generally, right? Even with my purpose of making people's stories better, there's obviously some internal feedback and reward in that, right?
Yeah.
It would be foolish to think there's not. And there's a really utopian ideal that I have of, if everybody's story becomes better, so does mine, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's an approach that's just different than, I'm just going to get everything I want, forget everybody else. And I know many people with that kind of mentality of, I don't care what you get. I don't know. I think I think it would be hard to limit the definition of purpose to say it's only things that are positively affecting the world around us, because there's obviously very purpose-driven people who have very selfish purposes, and they become very successful in those pursuits. And it would also be silly to say that everybody that does that has a miserable life, right? I think that's what we all like to think is
Right.
everybody who's crazy successful and stubborn or whatever, that they're miserable on the inside, and that's not true. That's a great question. I'm going to have to really, that's going to be a longer than a 2-minute ponder, I think, for me.
I don't know the right answer, but I think I know my answer. So I choose to believe that everyone has the potential for greatness inside them. And I choose to believe that greatness is not self-centered. The picture I have in my mind, and I think I've shared this on the podcast before, is this idea of like a seed in the ground. And for me as a leader, I want to brush away the debris on top of the surface so light can get to it. I want to water it and aerate the soil, whatever. And I believe if those things happen, that seed's going to sprout and there's greatness inside of it. So are there people who the soil's too dry, they never get the sunlight, for whatever reason that selfless greatness doesn't come out of them? Absolutely. Do they experience existential pain because they haven't sprouted in that way? Probably not all of them, right? I agree with Brad about that. Does it make me sad? Yes.
No.
So I think that's my answer, is like, no. A purpose, if it's a vision for the highest good you can achieve, doesn't have to involve you contributing to others. But it's sad when it doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I kind of think along the same lines of, purpose is always rooted in something about your values, something about your experiences, something about your genetics. Like there's all of these things, your mindset, all of these things that contribute to it. And, I think our role as people who think about purpose and who try to, call people and equip people to their purposes, that like part of what we have to do is to recognize that, and to recognize when like we have to go back to mindset, or we have to go back to values and excavate some of that first, which that's why the 6 Discoveries starts with mindset. There's something to that. So Brad, kind of back to your story a little bit. There's kind of 2 areas that I see you living your purpose out, just that are kind of visible to me. And I know that there's others, but just 2 that I'm curious for you to talk about is, one is in your family. So I'm curious, in your family, kind of how you think of this idea of stories and making people's stories better. And so maybe just kind of tell us the story of that. And then after that, we'll kind of come to the studio and what you're trying to do here.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, how far back do we dig, right? So when my wife Jeanette and I were on the path to get married, right, one of the major conversations we had was, I feel like someday I'm supposed to be an adoptive parent. And she felt the same way. And so it was one of those really like, it felt like it was going to be a hard conversation, but it was kind of a sigh of relief. And we had that discussion. Great. Life went on. We had our first son, and then our second son, and it was kind of, to me anyway, it was kind of in the back of mind. But then we started to have that conversation again, and she brought it up to me that she started sending me, it's a really weird world, right? The adoption world, because it's almost like it can feel like used car shopping. And that's a really horrific thing to say, but that's kind of like they put all these profiles online, and then you're looking through all these profiles and you don't get to know a human being. You get to know the little blips that whatever caseworker wrote for them.
Yeah.
And so there's like this weird feeling while you're going through that. And she started sending me profiles of kids that had pretty severe and profound disabilities. And just to be very transparent, that scared the crap out of me. And she was asking me to pray about it, think about it, and be willing and open to it. And I was not very open to it, but I looked like I was. I was really good husbanding and a really horrible human being inside. And she asked me if I was willing to go down to Bethany Children's Center and meet this young man named Will. And I had looked at his picture and his profile and read through it and read about all the medical needs he had. And out of everybody she had sent me, he scared me more than everybody because he was really medically involved. And I agreed to go down there again. I'm looking like a good husband. And all in my head, I'm like, all right, how do I tell her no on the way home?
Yeah.
And we get down to Bethany. We go in, and it's very much like a hospital environment, right? So we walk through these corridors and walk back to his unit. Nobody on the unit is ambulatory, which just means that all of these young children are in beds. And I struggle with that. And like most of the world, I think when you see somebody who doesn't fit the box of prosperous or able to prosper, you don't want to think about them because therein lies greater wrestles, right? And that challenged, even immediately, that was challenging my ideas that everybody has purpose, everybody has meaning, everybody's valuable. And so walking into the unit, and we sit down, he's got this little side bed with the TV and all this kind of stuff. And he wasn't in there. He was in his wheelchair. He was the only person that can get around on this unit. So he's bothering the heck out of every nurse on the unit. And I remember sitting there and just terrified of what are we doing? Like, why are we even here? I'm cool with not being comfortable. This is beyond being uncomfortable. And he wheeled around the corner, and I have no other way to explain it, but then an immediate knowledge of this is my son. And so, and he wheeled right up to me, is like out of a movie, right? He wheeled right up to me and leaned forward and put his head against my head and is like, okay.
Wow.
So that's that. And we did the training necessary. There was a lot of medical training of how do you change a feeding tube? How do you, he had a lot of heart issues and things like that. And how do you take care of this? And how do you read these monitors? And how do you hook them up? And how do you deal with this and that and this and that? On top of the trauma of any child who is left by his parents, right? And on top of the trauma of all the other things that he experienced, that any kid that goes through those things would have the same sort of leaning. And so he came home, and all of a sudden our house was very, very different. We were hooking up medical things at night. I was changing feeding tubes, things I'd never thought I would do. And the greatest lesson that I was learning from him, because going into it, I still had the thought that I'm giving him a better life. I'm giving him an opportunity to have a home, So I kind of had the great savior mentality going into it. And what I slowly realized, and this shaped so much of who I am now in every arena of life, was if I only gave the opportunity to anybody I meet, they're going to impact me more than I have any opportunity to impact them. I will never be the same person because of Will. And so we went through a lot of the regular life seasons, and then in February, actually the December of 2016, he got really, really sick, and we ended up going to the hospital, and then on and off. And then the end of January, beginning of February, they moved him down to Oklahoma City because that's where he was born. That's where his long-term doctors were. And we lived in the PQ basically for a week and a half. And it was a really neat thing. On February 15th, we did an adoption thing. Nobody had been rushed on it because it was like, oh, he's at home now, you know. But so on the 15th, they did the adoption via FaceTime, which is pretty weird, but neat. Yeah. And just for context, we'd really pushed for that because I think it was the 12th, he had coded, and because he was in DHS custody, they're not allowed to, like, he didn't have a DNR. So they had to save his life. And this might sound really cruel, but standing in the corner of the room watching what that entailed was horrific. You know, it was torture. Watching them do chest compressions and all this kind of stuff. And so our lawyer fought for us like crazy to finalize the adoption. And that night, my wife drove back down to Oklahoma City. She was going back and forth. I got a hotel room, went there and slept, got up in the morning, called Jeanette, you know, like 5 o'clock or something. She said, hey, he's doing really good. He's up and laughing and smiling, and asking for TV shows and all this kind of stuff. And so I took my time, got breakfast, went over. I walked in the room at 7:30, and at literally like 7:35, he passed away. And the realization that no matter how long or short a life is, it has value, and that it has meaning, and that the amount of people I've met who maybe just were nurses at Bethany or had met him at whatever, that they all say, he changed my life, you know, and he shaped the way I'm a father. He shaped the way I'm a leader. He shaped the way that I love people and see people not for what they can do for me, right? But can I help them live their best story? You know, he was a huge catalyst in that. And so after he passed, we kind of shut our house down for a few months of, you know, we had 2 really small kids, one of which has some unique needs of his own. And so we had to really walk through this kind of grief season of, all right, we have to make sure that his 2 brothers are healthy, that they're in a mentally good place, that they're not overwhelmed with things that are going on. And so we really were intentional during that season to walk with them and to lead them and to listen to them. And then we got another call in July maybe of 2017. So not super later, but later. And they were asking us if we would be willing to foster adopt a young man who was down at J.D. McCarty. And he was somebody that we had really considered, and we hadn't met him. But he was one of the kids in the first round that we were really like, this is a really cool kid as well. And so we went down and met him, and that's Liam. He's been with us now for, 4.5 years. Jeez. And then like a month later, we got a call from St. Francis because they had a baby that needed a place to stay for a short amount of time. And he's ended up still with us now too. So, yeah, so home has been a really wild ride. And then Jeanette, through all of this, started an amazing nonprofit called Will's House at willshouse.tulsa.org. And I know you guys have talked about wanting her to come on here at some point, and she'll do a much better job than I would at speaking to this. But there's so many families like ours who get completely isolated from the world. You know, she's given people date nights who haven't been on a date in over a decade because they have a child that they're 24/7 caregiver for. And so, yeah, there's this really amazing and beautiful outcome to simply being who we were supposed to be a day at a time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's part of what I love about that story is, and because you like kind of couch everything in story, is like, you know, I remember hearing you say at some point, you sort of made this like promise to Will that he wouldn't like ever be alone in the hospital. And like, that's a like very intimate kind of small, like, I don't mean small in like a bad way, but like it's a small intimate thing, but like how that expanded into now this big thing of like helping other people, like other families get to experience something that's similar, you know?
Well, and I think if we would embrace it, and if I get on a soapbox, just kick me off because I don't like being on one. But I think if we were willing as people to embrace our pain, we would be so much more effective at helping other people through theirs, right? Like, the reason I love families like mine so much is because I'm a family like mine, right? Like, I've experienced some amazing things and some really hard things in life. And that has equipped me, in my opinion, to live out my purpose with other people who are experiencing similar things. And there's no financial gain in it, right?
Yeah.
Like the communities, like my family, unfortunately, most of the time are single moms who are really, really poor because they're full-time caretakers that are living off of X amount of subsidy or whatever, you know, and that's not always the case, but it's a really typical story. But the beauty of helping somebody find and live their purpose when they thought it was done, right? I mean, you have a child with severe and profound medical needs or intellectual disabilities. It is incredibly easy to start thinking that that's life now, right? Yeah. That's it. There's nothing else because 24/7 for the rest of my life, I'm going to be doing this. And society and the world loses amazing people because we're not willing to enter into pain. You know, that's my favorite word in the world is compassion. Yeah. And it's literally because it means to enter into the suffering of somebody else to help them get out of it. Yeah. And I think that's why I love stories so much is you can enter into a story to make it better.
Yeah. And people almost can't help but enter into a story.
Yeah.
Right. We're built for story, and that's how we make meaning, as you said. And I just want to, you know, thank you for sharing your story. Amazing. But I just want to read back and tell me if I got this wrong, your purpose, because I think, you know, on my notepad here, it hits a little different after hearing you share some story than it did at the beginning of the episode. But your purpose is to empower people to live, your purpose is to empower people to love, live, and lead in the story they're made for. I get 100%. That right? Man, well, that's powerful stuff.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, how does that lead to Storycatcher? You have this name, Storycatcher.
Great business, make lots of money. Yeah, so it just carries over. Doing the films for years and thinking this is my meaning, my purpose, my everything, and then realizing that what I love is story and helping people tell their story better and live, love, and lead in their story better. I've found such a fantastic opportunity with most small business owners, right? Our whole thing here is build trust with video, right? It's not about creating commercials. I did lots of that. It's not about creating things that, oh my gosh, that's amazing, special effects, all this kind of stuff. It's about, I want to start conversations with people that are meaningful and that add value and get value, right? So it goes back to probably before Storycatcher, my brand was the Bearded Bard, right? And I always loved the concept of what a bard was, and it's the same thing as a story catcher, right? You hear and listen and catch the stories of people, and then you use art and creativity to share those stories to the world. So Storycatcher, to me, I'm on a mission to change marketing, because I think most marketing is a waste of money, and that I did it for years. I really want this place to become a model of, man, just sit across the table and start conversations that will create value for both people, right? It's that age-old adage that we all kind of roll our eyes at of the best deals are the one everybody wins in.
Yeah.
And that unfortunately has been said so many different ways over and over that it's kind of like I get it. But that's so true. Like, your business, PNPG, will thrive from the clients that get the most from your services, but those are also the clients that are probably going to give the most to make you better, not just financially, but they're going to help you grow as human beings and as a business.
And I think the connection I would make is it works on an individual level too. Which that's what I hear you saying, is that in the same way that you get what you give in a business relationship, man, as a leader, as someone who's investing in their own character development, as someone who's working with intention to get more and more clear on their purpose, you get what you give.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we kind of run down from time, it's hard to even know like how to wrap an episode like this up. Just I want to just reflect what Luke said. I appreciate you sharing your story and just getting to watch it from the outside a little bit over the last couple of years. I just appreciate your family, what you all stand for, your purpose, all of that. So thank you. And I don't know, we always kind of do some wrap up final thoughts, like what's the lesson learned? And, for me, I think what I'm kind of taking away for me, and, when I think about this, like, how do I apply this to me? It's really about like, how am I limiting who I'm willing to apply my purpose to? Like, that's kind of part of what I heard in your sort of like, I'm being a good husband, I'm going to go, but I'm going to figure out how to say no, is like, my purpose, like, how am I limiting who I'm going to apply it to? And like, what are the things that are contributing to that? And just being willing to kind of blow that up and say, oh, it can apply to anybody and everybody. So that's kind of my takeaway, and the thing that is challenging me from who you are, who your family is, and from your story. So Luke, what about you? It's a hard episode to wrap.
No, I mean, my takeaway is like, I'm inspired, and, thank you for inspiring me. And I think what it brings to mind is that we need inspiration, and courageous leaders have to inspire each other. Like, none of us can do it by ourselves. And I think for people listening, I mean, I know anyone who's listened to this episode is inspired, but my hope for them is that they go get more inspired, right? And they go inspire others and connect in meaningful ways, and go find the right people to like keep the fire burning. And just like Ben applied this, to your personal purpose, and how are you applying it, and all of that. Like, I hope people listening will be inspired, but then they'll take some sort of action and like keep feeding the twigs to that leadership, that intentionality, that purpose fire. And thanks for giving me some twigs for my fire.
Absolutely. Pleasure. Well, Brad, I'll let you kind of have last word if there's like a takeaway that you want people to take away, but then also just make sure you tell people where to find you, how to get connected with Storycatcher, and just let people know that.
Yeah. I mean, any takeaway, I think, and my takeaway is based on your takeaways, and I can't remember who said it, so I'm not going to make up who said it, but there was a chief of a tribe who said that we're all connected like a spider web, and if one strand is plucked, the entire web shakes. Mm-hmm. And so that idea of motivation, inspiration, great, take it, but do something with it, mm-hmm. right? Otherwise, it's totally meaningless. And again, motivation is worthless without consistency, right? So being consistent and showing up a little bit and growing a little bit every day, it's that journey of 1,000 miles, right? Mm-hmm. Just one step. Just do something today to live out the purpose you know you have. And as you discover the bigger purpose, live that out.
Yep. Awesome. So, where do people find you? We appreciate your services.
Oh, yeah.
So how can other people take advantage of your services?
So storycatcher.studio. You can also find us on any of the social media things. Alicia does all that. I'm ignorant to any of it. But it's all Storycatcher Studio. And so anybody in Tulsa, any business in Tulsa, or anybody traveling through Tulsa, I'd love to sit down. We'll have a conversation. That's where everything starts to me, is let's have a conversation. And if we fit together, awesome. And if we don't, hopefully I know somebody you would fit with.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll link all of that in the show notes. So, and then, for us, for people listening, people watching, if you're interested in exploring your own personal purpose or the purpose of your business, we'd love to reach out to us. purposeandperformancegroup.com. Find us on all the socials as well. Wherever you get your social feeds, you can probably find us. Brad, thank you very much for joining us on this. It's actually a very cold, wintry day today. So thanks for joining us on this day. And we just appreciate you being here. And for all of you listening, thanks for listening to Magic in the Room. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo, and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love, available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.